Wagwan, everybody. Welcome to the Dis Affamie History podcast, where we'll be speaking about history and as well family history and how history relates in terms of Caribbean people for the present as well as in the past, and how in the past what that does and brings forth for what we are going through at present and what we can learn from our history, from our family, and take that moving forward. So I do hope you enjoy the podcast. And if you like it, please ensure to subscribe, like, and review. Thank you. So I want to thank you so much, Océane, for coming on to the podcast, Dis Affamie History, and to talk about your paper that you wrote, Braided Archives, which I find rather interesting. But before we start, can I just have you introduce yourself to the listeners?
Yeah, so my name is Océane Nyela. I am a third-year PhD candidate in communication and culture at York University.
Thank you so much for that. And so I wanted to ask you in terms of the title of the paper that you wrote, which was Braided Archives. Very interesting. And I assume it has some meaning and some significant use as to why you used it. Would you be able to explain as to why that you use this to tie in for hair?
So in my own work, um, I think about hair as something that can be encoded, or even like imbued with meaning or significance. We know that things like gender, social status, political association, etc., are often associated with hair. So I think about hair braiding itself as an archival practice. And I think it was a very interesting and fruitful kind of metaphor to carry as I was working on this project. I'm also a little bit obsessed with titling or naming things in a way that I think or that I hope describes the kind of overall aim or objective of like a paper or a project, because I think that that's very important. And so because this was my master's dissertation, I took a very long time to come up with the title, and the title was one of the last things that I was able to kind of land on once it was all written up. Um, and it really kind of helped guide me in my thinking and my writing, but it's not something that I had prior to writing the paper. It kind of came as I was working through the project.
No, that's great because it's a different way to kind of look at things and to be able to know that we're kind of walking with history on ourselves. So, um, Black hair, is often seen or shared with cultural and social meetings. Would you be able to explain these layers and how they play into the diasporic identity and experiences?
Yeah. So, as you might have read in the paper, we know that hair carries a range of social and cultural meanings across cultures, geographies, and time. So it's something that is true for humans across time and space. But from what we know about pre-colonial Africa, hairstyles could be used to signify things such as family names, your social status in a tribe, if you were mourning, if you were about to go to war. We also know that as the highest place or as the highest positioned on a person's body, it was often seen as a gateway for the gods. So it always had religious and social meaning kind of nestled in, and it was always revered for those reasons. We also find this in the diaspora, but I think listeners will maybe be more familiar with the implications or the social implications of Afrocentric hairstyles in the diaspora, kind of like the afro, which has kind of become an icon of what Black hair looks like, or even the political affiliation. I know that when I think about an afro, I think about the image of Angela Davis, which has also become iconic in itself in the civil rights movement and Pan-Africanism. So I think that it's very interesting because it's something that is cross-cultural, but also so specific to Black communities, whether on the African continent or in the diaspora. And what I find particularly interesting is that a lot of the hairstyles that emerged or were created in pre-colonial Africa still persist to this day, which is really what I'm kind of interesting in understanding why and what that says about what it means to be part of a diaspora.
Yeah, no, definitely. And what you've mentioned kind of leads into the next question here in terms of with hair being a symbolic element in various cultures. In the context of Black hair, how does the article further, discuss this symbolism and its relationship to identity, heritage, and of course, resistance?
Yeah, so as part of my thesis, so I was supposed to do something different, but the COVID-19 pandemic kind of I had to change course. So I relied on semi-structured interviews and an autoethnography, which are two methods that are becoming more popular in the humanities. So for the autoethnography, I maintained a journal for a couple months where I just wrote about memories and feelings that I had about my own hair. And then for the interviews, I asked my participants to begin by retelling a memory that they had of getting their hair braided. And so this allowed me to like not only rely on the historical record and the archival research that exists, but to see whether or not my participants, or even if I had retained some of those cultural and social meanings that are associated with hair, or if we were even aware of those meanings. And what my participants showed me, or what they shared with me, is that at least for them and for myself, hair is kind of like the segue, or can be one of the segues into a sort of political or even racial awakening. And it can also be a space that you can use to resist anti-Blackness in a way that's maybe it's not necessarily going to a march or to a protest or lobbying, but it's something that you can do every day on yourself for yourself that indicates to people who are part of the Black diaspora and that are not part of the Black diaspora that this is my identity, this is who I am, this is how I identify, this is who I want to be in community with. These are my ancestors, these are the people that I want to celebrate using one of my ethnic features, quote unquote. And I know that that moment, at least for my participants and even for me, where you kind of see your hair in this different way, where it's more than just a burden, or more than something that has to be braided, or more than something that people make fun of you for, but that it has this like long political and social history. It can become so powerful, and there's really a transformation that happens at that moment.
No, definitely. And I know that you had spoke just about in terms of some of those hairstyles from before pre-colonial Africa, still being remained. And basically, maybe we can be able to discuss further on some of those hairstyles and its meaning. Now, I do have a picture here I'll just share and we can kind of discuss on that. Are you able to
Yeah,
see?
so yes. So unfortunately, as we kind of discussed before we started recording, there's a real lack of information about what the hairstyles are or what they mean. One of the books that I relied on in writing my thesis is called Hair Story by Lori L. Tharps. And she also has a co-author, but their name is escaping me right now, unfortunately. But one of the things they note in that book is that Dutch explorers actually wrote many diary entries about the range of hairstyles that they've um, see and or that they saw while they were exploring pre-colonial Africa and the significance of those styles. So it's known that those documents exist or might have existed, but I was unfortunately not necessarily able to access them, which is why I focused on cornrows, because they are one of those hairstyles, right? That you see in pre-colonial Africa. Maybe they're not called cornrows, and I mean, my family, we don't call them um cornrows, and that's not what they're called in Cameroon, but I have Haitian friends that wear cornrows. I have Congolese friends that wear cornrows. I have Jamaican friends that wear cornrows. And so I think that the fact that that hairstyle I could see everywhere, and I could really it became kind of the center of the conversation, also because of when I was writing my thesis. So between 2016 and 2020 was when the conversation about cultural appropriation became really big, and everyone wanted to know about cultural appropriation. And every time I told someone I was doing research on Black hair, the first thing they would ask me is, what do you think about Kim Kardashian wearing boxer braids? And there's a certain level of frustration that I have with that, because I understand why the conversation is happening, but it's not necessarily what I'm interested in commenting on all the time. But nonetheless, cornrows, which were at the kind of center of the cultural zeitgeist, um, if I want to put it that way, it was a very important, or at least a very significant hairstyle for me and my own thinking, because as I mentioned, um, it was something that I saw really appearing across time and space. Braided hairstyles um, are something that were carried from pre-colonial Africa to now. And I mean, my work has shifted a bit since my master's thesis was published. Um, I'm focusing more on the physicality now and the actual act of braiding hair and what that does to the body, and understanding hair braiding as an embodied practice, so a practice that involves not only the body of the braider itself, but the body of the person who gets their hair braided. I know that I move a lot when I get my hair braided, or I'll fall asleep and the hairdresser has to move me in a certain way. And so it's something that is physical, both in the doing, but also in the kind of receiving. Um, and so I think that my article, so my master's thesis at that point, I was really interested in the styles themselves. But now, a few years later, I'm kind of I've shifted a little bit from that, and I'm really more interested in the actual physicality of it, and like what it feels like to braid hair, and what does that mean if you're a hair braider, and the kind of knowledge that you need to carry with you, because as you mentioned, we are walking history, right? And so what are the cognitive necessities, that you need to be able to look at a head of hair and know that I'm going to separate it this way, and I'm going to have this many braids on this side, this many braids on this side, and I'm going to create a beautiful pattern in hair. Because I think that it's something that is not often thought about as like an intellectual practice, but it takes a lot of skill. I know that I am terrible at parting hair and at like doing the neat lines, right? But like it's a real skill, and it's a real there's my uh article also touches on that a little bit, but there is a real like mathematical and geometric knowledge that you have to create the hairstyles that we see. You can't just sit down and decide that you're going to cornrow someone's hair and all the braids are going to be perfect and equal, or you're going to give someone box braids and all the boxes are going to be hexagon, or they're going to be triangles. There's a real kind of intellectual process that takes place, and unfortunately, it's not really discussed as such, and that's really kind of what I'm interested in and what I want to bring forward, because that is knowledge that comes all the way from pre-colonial Africa, and that for some reason, through oral histories and through physicality and through song and through the ways that we move and kind of behave in the world, were maintained. And I think that it's very beautiful, and it's very it's at the center of what I do, right? This kind of ode to not only the resilience but the ingenuity of Black people, because we don't, the conversation is often about resilience and how we're so resilient and we've been through so much, but not the ingenuity and how smart and how the things and the knowledge that we have that is often not even thought about as knowledge. It's relegated to like the realm of craft, when I think that it should be reconsidered. I know that that was completely different
Oh
than
no,
what you
no,
asked.
that's
Sorry.
no, no, that's fine because that's exactly it. The fact that we don't have enough of our history documented. It is, as you said, it is pretty much all oral. And the fact that you have been able to at least find a picture, because I know what that is, to find a needle in a haystack type of thing, to support what you are presenting. And maybe we can just talk a little bit about this picture as well here that's in front of us, because of these four different individuals, each one has a different hairstyle. And as you said, there are intricacies here that aren't really talked about, aren't really, thought of as anything. It's just, oh yeah, you just do your hair and that's it. No, it's not. There's a lot more thought going into things. And maybe we can start on, I guess, at least this one closest to us. I guess it would be to the left here,
Mhm.
who that and what that would represent.
Yeah, so the adornment of hair itself, um, from what I've researched and from what I've kind of gathered, would um, at least signify either a certain place in society, or would be used to signify someone's status. So I know that there were hairstyles that were worn, for example, if a man was about to go to war, or for example, women that were in mourning would sometimes shave their hair. So the adornment in itself signifies something. I think it's also important to note that those hairstyles were also very intricate.
Mhm.
And there's this kind of misconception of pre-colonial Africans as savages, right? And dirty and so on and so forth. But the Dutch explorers that are mentioned in that book by Laurie Tharps mentioned that actually unkept hair was seen negatively, right? You could be usually if you had unkept hair, it meant that you were an outcast. So either you had gone through something that had led you to be unable to care for your hair, or you were shunned or banned from your community and therefore were not able to care for your hair. So we can at least see from this picture that these are people who are part of a community and that have people around them to um, care for their hair and to create these hairstyles, because the hairdresser was also a figure that existed um, in pre-colonial Africa, and that was also had a significant social status because hair was seen as something so important and potent. Medicine men, for example, in Cameroon, carried hair with them. Um, it was believed that Yoruba women of Nigeria could drive men insane with only one strand of hair. So not anyone could touch your hair, and it took a specific person in the community to be a hairdresser. And so what we can at least see from this picture and infer is that these are all people who are part of a community where they are at least in good standing enough where they will have their hair done. And I mean, I'm only postulating and hypothesizing. But I would assume, and I think it would be safe to assume that the different styles on that picture all signify something different about the person that is wearing it. And I would say that maybe the more adornment, the more significance. So at the like furthest back, we have the person who has it seems to be like leaves or another type of adornment in their hair. I would say that that probably holds a specific or certain significance that unfortunately I'm not able to kind of parse through. Hopefully I will in the future. I am um, contacting archives in Germany and across the world to kind of get access to those documents. And hopefully I'll be able to kind of match hairstyles to the pictures and images that we have. But yeah, it's very interesting um, to think about how important even at that time hair was and how intricate and a hairstyle could be, and how like the practices that we have now, you go to your hairdresser, it's a communal experience. That was still the case hundreds of years ago.
No, perfect. Because again, what you're indicating as well is the sense of community. You have to be part of the community. It's not necessarily, yes, we can probably do it ourselves, but it just shows that we are together in the sense of what we're doing, we are participating and moving forward into being able to participate just in that society, and how important that it was in terms of who did your hair, who touched your hair, and what that references all means, which is, sometimes we don't think of it in that way. And because we just want to, especially in modern times, we just want to think that, oh yeah, we can just do it all and it doesn't mean anything, when in reality there is meaning behind it, right?
Mhm.
So going on to, hair seen as a social currency, and especially in females, how it defines femininity. And for Black hair, that may not be seen as conforming to Western standards. Would you be able to kind of speak a little bit to this?
Yes, so as you've probably read or you probably know, hair not only defines femininity, but it's also a racial marker. It's in fact one of the few kind of phenotypes that not that doesn't die, but that's still used to this day to differentiate between groups racially, even though the idea of races has been rejected or is kind of pushed back in the sciences and in the social sciences. One thing that I found, which is very interesting, is that in forensic science, for example, um, hair and the classification of hair along racial lines still happens. And so a forensic scientist will look at a hair and they will say, this is a mongoloid hair, this is negroid hair, this is Caucasian hair. So it still exists in or it persists as like a racial marker in that way. But what's also interesting, because it also is related to definitions or ideas around femininity, is that if you look at the kind of history of the concept of femininity, or at least a historical trajectory, that also has a racial component. We know that the ideal of femininity is not the Black woman. Um, and so you have this double bind where no matter what you do, you can't actually fully measure up to what this category demands of you, because you're already excluded by way of your racial identity and the hair that grows out of your head, right? And so this is it's like further exacerbated by the fact that Black hair has and continues to often be demonized, or at least not really seen as neat or clean. We know that in post-Civil War um, America and freed um, African Americans often had their hair compared to wool or other animal furs. And even more recently, the Crown Act, which is an American legislation that is aimed at preventing discrimination based on hair, was only passed in 2021. That is, and I think it was passed in October. So it's not even a full, like, it's 3 years, almost 4 years ago that a law was passed to prevent discrimination based on hair. Um, I'm from Montreal, and I remember in around 2016, 2020, so when the conversation about cultural appropriation was happening, there were also a lot of headlines about Black women being fired from jobs. I remember a specific example about this woman who worked at a restaurant and who was fired because she wore box braids, and I guess her boss did not think that that was a professional enough hairstyle. And so um, it it can become really difficult if you are invested in this concept of femininity to really kind of reach for it when you know that it is exclusionary, and that exclusion has always been based around, or at least historically also had a racial element, and that hair, even though it's not something that you can control, continues to be associated with specific races and then specific attributes, and it supposedly says something about your character.
No, I definitely agree. And what you said there in terms of our hair being defined as wool, that was one of the justifications that they used to to continue with slavery, is that we are seen as less than as an animal.
Mm-hmm.
That's why chattel slavery continued for such a long period of time, because they wanted to use that definition of what our hair is actually like, that when you touch it, it feels like wool. When in reality, even though it's still the same, even genetically, it's just that our hair is just more tightly wound in terms of in a coils type of thing, not necessarily that it would be very genetically different, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it's just interesting as to what still remains from that time until now. And as you said, you just mentioned this law. I mean, 2021 and it's 2024. So, I mean, we still have a long, long ways to go. And, just like you had mentioned previously in the discussion about, touching hair, Solange, made that single about don't touch my hair, and this theme of people not touching hair or being careful as to who touch your hair, where did this come from and what's the meaning behind it?
Yeah, so Solange has said, or rather, she wrote that this song is like a larger reflection on the hostility that she's faced in a predominantly white industry, but also in her own life. And for me, I found the lyrics very touching and salient to my own personal experiences, and to the experiences of my friends and family members, because I think that we all have stories about people touching our hair or asking questions about our hair that they would never ask someone that had curly hair, but the curls were looser, or that had or that has straight hair. And the song is also very significant because an earlier version of this thesis, which was a paper that I submitted in one of my classes, uses some of the lyrics as an epigraph. And those lyrics are, they don't understand what it means to me, where we chose to go, where we've been to know. And I thought that those lyrics were so relevant because it's true. Most people don't know or understand the significance of hair in Black communities, whether you're on the African continent or in the diaspora, or they don't even know or think about the work that it takes to maintain hairstyles that either keep our hair healthy or that fit within the Western standard and the pressures that can come from having to chemically straighten or alter or braid your hair because you are going to face social or sometimes even monetary consequences. And sometimes even at the cost of your health. For example, we know that relaxers are full of chemicals and can be extremely dangerous, and yet we continue to live in a world where this is seen as an option, as something that you might have to do if you want to be taken seriously by your colleagues. If you are a lawyer, for example, or if you're a professor, or if you work in a more like in a corporate um, setting. We also know that heat damage can also really be fixed by, or can only really be fixed by cutting off that hair. Once your hair is heat damaged, there's no way to kind of recuperate that curl. And yet, people are still expected to iron their hair or find any means that they can to have it straight. They might be told by a romantic partner that they prefer them with straight hair. They might be told that it looks more professional to have straight hair. And so you're still expected to do these things that might be detrimental to not only your health, but the way that you see yourself, because you live in a world where unfortunately Black hair is misunderstood, and um, it is seen as something that needs to be tamed, or that needs to be neat, and that needs to look a certain way for it to be acceptable. I'll talk about in my own life. I had my hair relaxed until my third year of my undergrad, which is when I decided to go natural. And part of the reasons why I had my hair relaxed was I'm very impatient. So it was just easier for me to have um, my hair bone straight. But also, I grew up in a predominantly white community for a significant part of my childhood, and I just wanted to look like my classmates. I was the I was the first Black kid in my elementary school. No one had braids. No one had little puff puffs. I just wanted to look like other people. And it took me thinking about how I don't know what my hair looks like when it's not straight. I've never seen my hair texture in its natural state. And it's when I had that reflection that I was like, wait a minute, this is weird that I have no idea. Every 6 weeks I go get my hair relaxed and I don't think about it. And I had my scalp burned at one time because I have a very sensitive scalp, and I kept going back because I was like, this is people tell me I look pretty when my hair looks like this. I get compliments. I don't get people trying to hide things in my hair. I don't get people trying to touch my hair or yank my braids. And so it can be very difficult because at that point when I was towards the end of my undergrad, I knew all of the risks to my health that I was enduring to keep my hair that way. But I still transitioned for like 6 months, and I wanted to hold on to that straight hair for as long as I could. And I wanted my hair to be long enough to like look good in an afro before I cut it. And so even for someone like me who was informed and who's now doing work and research around Black hair, even it's difficult for me to escape those preconceived ideas and those preconceived notions, even if I know that they're not true, but you grow up with them and you reinforce them yourself, and you have people who reinforce them in your own life, and it becomes very um difficult to escape. And so it's part of why I thought that song was so relevant for my work, but also just for me personally, because I was like, Solange is right. People don't understand what our hair means to us. They don't understand why we make the choices that we make about our hair, and they don't understand the consequences that we might face, whether we relax our hair, don't relax our hair, wear braids, wear an afro, wear wigs, or just decide to shave our heads entirely.
No, definitely. And I mean, when you recalled that story of the fact that you had to, after, relaxing your hair, people having to cut off their hair, I mean, that's exactly happened to myself. I had to get at a point where I had to cut it all off and to regrow it in a natural state. So it's just, honestly, just fighting those type of preconceived notions, and they still are still active or still present in today. So, Oceane, what would you say would be, I guess, some positive reinforcements of people of African descent to embrace their natural hair?
So my last answer was quite negative, I guess, but I do think that there have been positive reinforcements and a kind of re-examination of natural hair and what it means to have natural hair and what you can kind of signify by wearing natural hair. I know that at least in the scope of my article, for me and my participants, a lot of us realized around early mid teenage years, so like 14, 15, that hair can say and communicate so much about a person. Um, but like I mentioned, it can also be like a small scale way of resisting or fighting back against anti-Blackness, right? And one of the things that I've always known about myself and that I tell people jokingly is that I feel the most myself with braids in my hair. I feel the most Black, the most African with braids um in my hair. So I understand, like I've always understood even innately that there's something that happens when I wear a hairstyle that was worn by my ancestors or that's worn by people on the African continent. I can't necessarily explain it or put it into words, but I know that there's something that happens not only physically but also mentally when I wear a specific hairstyle. And I think that a lot of my participants also kind of felt that way in the discussions that we've had. Um, there's been a kind of rediscovery of Black hair, and the conversations that we have around Black hair now are more positive, or at least acknowledge the historical and social significance of Black hair in ways that maybe did not happen like 10 or 15 years ago. So one of the most discussed, or at least at the time, documentaries about Black hair was Good Hair by Chris Rock. And that documentary has been critiqued for good reason, because it places the onus, or at least the responsibility, on Black women rather than society at large, that tells us that our hair should be maintained in certain ways. But there's been a wave of other documentaries and celebrities have hair care lines, and there really seemed to be like a reinvigoration of Black hair, and people um, tend to really be proud to have those hairstyles. And I will say that in my own life, I'm definitely more comfortable just having my natural hair around without it being like in a bun or something, just afro for show. And I will say that having a group of Black friends and really having a circle of people who also have or wear their similar those hairstyles, but also have a range. Because another thing is that Black hair doesn't look one way or another, and so um, I definitely have observed, at least anecdotally, that there seemed to be a resurgence, or people seem to be like starting to wear those styles again and being proud of them. I don't know if it's a reaction to, or I would say that maybe it's in part a reaction to this phenomenon of cultural appropriation, but also of like information about hairstyles becoming more significant. I know Glamour magazine had a entire um, cover and a series about Black hair, and they interviewed hairstylists, celebrities. I think the name of the issue was it Our Hair or Was It You? And it's based on um, it's a play on a commercial for a relaxer. And so I think that slowly it's becoming more salient and people are becoming um, more aware. And I think people are still going through the experiences that maybe we went through when we were younger, but as a whole, um, we seem to be moving towards an acceptance, at least, that people should be allowed to do what they want with their hair, and that the conversation shouldn't maybe be about the individual, but thinking about why society positions black hair or even just hair that isn't straight um, in a certain way. So at the end of the day, like I personally don't think that it's good to be too prescriptive, and I would never tell someone how to wear their hair or that they have to wear it in a way that reflects an Afrocentric hairstyle if it makes them uncomfortable or if they don't think that it's aesthetically pleasing. But I would want them to at least think about, why do you think an afro is not aesthetically pleasing, or why do you prefer your hair straight versus curly? And usually that discovery in itself might lead to an embrace, or at least an understanding that you are wearing your hair in a certain way because of years and years of historical um, development and ideas, and that it's not, like you mentioned, it goes back to this idea that we are walking history. We're quite literally the embodiment of centuries of discourse around what it means to be Black, what it means to have natural hair, what it means to live in a world that is only now starting to see Black people as people in themselves. And so I think what's most important, or at least what I try to do, is to create an environment where people aren't shamed for the hair that grows out of their head naturally, since it's not something that you can control.
I couldn't agree with you more on that. And it does appear to be changing in a more positive direction. So, which is good. So, Oceane, as we now close out this discussion that we're having on Black hair, what would be, I guess, your final thoughts on Black hair for the diaspora?
Um, I think that um, there's this idea of complete disconnect between the Black diaspora and the African continent, right? It's an idea that is in culture. It's also an idea that exists in academia, and that has been critiqued by a lot of academics, myself included. But I think I would ask people to, or even just reflect on this idea that the way that we wear our hair now is proof, or at least indicates, that there is still a connection between us here and the diaspora and the African continent. We were never fully severed. Historical records will show that. A lot of people who were formerly enslaved returned to Africa and so on and so forth, but that we also are a people that um, we have this gift, right, where we can connect with people that are from completely different countries, have had completely different experiences than us, based on something like hair. I can come up to a Black woman and tell her about the last time I was at the hairdresser's, and she will relate to that experience. And it creates a space for us to bond in the way that I can't with my friends who aren't Black, no matter where you come from. And it's, to me, it's something that is so beautiful. The fact that we're all over the world, and yet we have this, like, this thing that is in us that connects us in a way that I don't know is true for non-Black folks. Um, and I think that it's something to be kind of celebrated, because for so long it was demonized. And now that we're starting to reclaim it, I just, yeah, I'm like, I'm always in awe of the fact that a hairstyle like the cornrows could exist 300 years ago and it still exists now. Like, to me, that's the fact that no one has like really thought about that before I started doing my work, to me is mind blowing. Because I'm like, that's incredible. No one else thought to like think this through. How many practices survive in such an intact way? And so I just, yeah, I always get kind of giddy when I'm asked to think about this, because I really think that it's something that is so beautiful and has like, it deserves to be studied in a rigorous way, like other practices, but um, unfortunately wasn't. And I'm hoping that at least with my work, I can start that discussion, and other people can also kind of chime in, and we can really that we can hopefully um, have the answers to that picture that we just looked at earlier, and that we can know what those hairstyles were specifically and what they mean, and that a child in 10 years who wants to do a project can have the information that they need, and that they don't have to do years and years of research. They don't have to go get an advanced degree to be able to kind of have that information accessible to them.
No, thank you. And you definitely hit one of those themes, and that is the sense of community. So it doesn't matter from where anybody is, whether it is someone from Somalia, someone from Angola, someone from here in the West. If they meet and see each other, they can connect instantly. And that's a beautiful way to approach it. So thank you so much, Océane, for coming on to the podcast and speaking about this. And hopefully maybe we can have you back on again to talk on maybe on some of the actual braiding, the hairstyles themselves. But truly, I thank you so much for this. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Hoped you enjoyed this episode, and if you did, please make sure to like, follow, subscribe, and write a review for the episode wherever you listen to your podcast. Thank you.